but I think in general we should worry when a company has a motive agenda, then it may not always align with what's best for the world. I mean, I think we've seen that in the social media companies, right? If you look at, I don't want to pick on any one company, but in the social media companies in general, right? It's like, well, they want to make money. So lots of times they will promote things that, get people to stay longer on their site and show people more things. But those things that they're promoting might end up having a very negative effect. And I think that's just one example.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back today. We've got somebody, we're going to be talking about machine learning and various aspects of AI, as the kids call it. We have Craig A. Knoblock. Is that right? Did I say that right?
Knoblock.
Knoblock. This has a German kind of...
Yeah, it has a German...
Means garlic.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm calling you from Germany, so I'm well-versed in the German way of talking by now. Speak a little German. So you are a professor at the University of Southern California. You are specializing in machine learning. So what drew you to computer science? What kept you engaged for so many years in this topic?
Well, I think, I got interested in doing research. And then once I came to USC, I worked on interesting problems. And I think one of the things that kept me engaged and keep working in this general area is that there was always new things to learn. There was always, the field changes fairly rapidly. Now it changes more rapidly than ever. But I also think that, there's so many interesting applications of the technologies and AI that we work on that I've always had the opportunity to learn new domains, learn new areas. So for a while, I got into learning all about geography and all the different things you can do with sort of historical maps. And then I got into some other areas like, for a while, I did some work in sort of the museum space and then some work in sort of the medical side. So just lots of really interesting problems and always new things to learn. So it always sort of stayed interesting and engaging.
Was it highly theoretical at first, like there wasn't, and then moved to be more applicable over time? Or was there, in your early days, was there a clear way to utilize this kind of stuff?
That's an interesting question. I think there was always sort of clear applications. But I think in the early days, the applications were sort of further away, right? That, AI hadn't sort of matured to the point where it really was making as much of an impact as it does today. So now there's so many real world applications where, AI is actually being used in our everyday lives. So I'd say, I don't know if I'd call it theoretical, but it was a little bit farther away from actual real applications, whereas now things we work on get applied in the world.
Yeah, we have the tools now, I guess.
Yeah,
so you have a history of working on knowledge of graph research. What is that?
Yeah, well, we refer to it as knowledge graph research.
Yeah, what is that?
So knowledge graphs are basically a way of combining very diverse sources of information into some kind of coherent source. Google uses a knowledge graph behind their search engine, for example, right, where they actually have all of this data stored in a knowledge graph about people and entities, kinds of things. And so sometimes when you do a search, it just looks it up in its local knowledge graph. So lots of times you search about someone who's fairly famous, it'll be in their knowledge, and it'll give you a little sidebar on the right side that basically will give you sort of the biography and picture and sort of detailed structured information about that person and stuff. But in general, knowledge graphs are really about pulling information from lots of diverse sources of information and putting them together in some kind of structured format that then you can do sort of additional analysis or learning on top of.
Interesting. And has that changed over time, the way that we use knowledge graph research? Is this a new concept, or is this something that was around from the beginning?
I'd say it's been around in earlier forms and was called different things. So I think Google was the one who sort of promoted the name knowledge graph itself, and then it kind of took off. But before that, we had what were called knowledge-based systems. And they were sort of very, I would say, early forms of sort of the knowledge graph. And they just had a different name to them.
Interesting. Yeah. So what is, your research focuses on something called data semantics. Can you give us a little insight about that? Because, you're not talking to somebody who knows all this stuff.
Yeah, no. So the basic idea behind the data semantics is that when you want to build a knowledge graph and you want to pull information in from various sources, one of the challenges that when it comes from different sources, you need to understand what the information actually represents in order to bring it together into some kind of coherent whole. And I'll give you an example of this, right? So let's imagine that you have a table of data about maybe students, okay? And in that table of data, you've got a bunch of columns of information, right? Maybe one column looks like maybe it has the name of a university. Another column maybe has, a date, and maybe a fourth column also has a date. Now, you could recognize each of those things separately, but the question is, what does that actually mean, right? And so maybe one possible meaning of that table is that this is a student who goes to this particular school, and maybe the date represents, one of the dates maybe represents the date they were born, and maybe the other date represents the date where they matriculated at that school, right? And so the semantics of the data have to do with actually representing sort of what that information actually represents. So lots of times what will happen is, in research and in various projects and stuff, someone will hand you a table of data, and then, you may have to go back and say, well, what does this table actually represent? Or actually look it up in the documentation, or, get some additional information to actually understand the actual meaning. And so one of the projects we've worked on here at ISI is being able to take this kind of information that comes from these different sources and then represent the semantics of that data, so that when you bring together multiple sources, you can actually link it all together and make sense of it in terms of some kind of coherent whole.
It sounds like you're almost humanizing or translating it to human forms. It's like, what conclusions can we jump to from the perspective of humans to make sense of this?
Well, I mean, it would help for humans, but it also helps for machines, right? Because, if you hand a machine a table of data and it's got two dates in it, well, what do those, if it doesn't know what those dates represent, then it's hard for it to actually do any kind of analysis on top of that data or machine learning. So it's sort of key, if you really want to effectively use information that comes from these various sources, you need to know what they mean.
But most uses of technology are specifically for enriching humans and our environment and everything. That there's not too much standalone technology that's out for its own good, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Although you could say that maybe Chat GPT now is good.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, we'll move into this era where AI will have its own, modus operandi. So you've published 300 papers, more than 300 papers. You've received 7 Best Paper Awards. Pretty cool. What was one of the most impactful contributions to the field, and what did it mean to you?
Yeah, I would say, if I had to pick one, then I would say it was probably this project that we did on combating human trafficking, where the idea there was to build a large knowledge graph to basically help law enforcement agencies find and prosecute traffickers, the human traffickers themselves. And the key idea there was we were basically mining a huge amount of information that was just published openly on the web. So basically millions of pages of information that were basically web ads, pulling that information together and then putting them into a giant knowledge graph where we basically had, billions of pieces of information in that knowledge graph. And what that knowledge graph provided, to build a knowledge graph, there was a bunch of technology challenges that we had to address, right? So you had to, do a lot of extraction and cleaning up of the data, and a lot of sort of doing this sort of modeling of the data because it's coming from different sources. So we needed to understand, okay, for each piece of information that's being extracted, what were the semantics? What did it represent? But once you put it all together, then what it allowed the law enforcement agencies to do was to get a much better picture of actually what was happening, right? So they could identify individuals that were potentially being trafficked. And one of the things that they gave us some feedback on is that one of the most useful things for them with the tools would have been allow them, when they were actually trying to prosecute a trafficker, when there was some defense where they would make some claim in court, they could go back during their lunch break and pull up the tool and find the data that basically would contradict their claim, that they were making in court, and it would allow them to successfully prosecute the traffickers. And so for me, that was such an important problem that we could actually have an impact on that I think that I would list that as sort of one of the most impactful ones.
That is very impactful and one of the most useful examples of using, technology, machine learning in order to make the world a better place. Do you find that, and this is off topic, is there ethical concerns that also on top of that law enforcement might turn around and use this for nefarious purposes too? Is that something that you consider?
I think in this particular case, I think that, I think any tool in general, could potentially be turned around and used for more nefarious purposes. But in terms of the people that we were working with, I mean, in this space, people were so passionate about really trying to help the victims and find the traffickers that it didn't feel like that there was anyone that was going to be hurt in this process. And and just to be clear, all the data was never released. So we collect data, built the knowledge graph. The only people that had access to it were the people that were actually working for the law enforcement agencies.
Okay, yeah, and I don't mean like those poor human traffickers, poor them. I'm more like when governments start punishing dissidents and things like this for. Because this is a consideration I have going into politics, discussing things like this. We always worry about the dystopian future that may or may not be waiting for us.
And we should worry about those things. I actually think it's really important to worry about those things. That we want to be careful about how technology is being used and what technologies we even build to support those kinds of things.
Okay, thank God you're thinking about that. Whew, okay. But you've also been awarded a fellow of both the Association of Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, the AAAI, and the Association of Computing Machinery. Sounds pretty prestigious. What does it mean to be recognized by these particular groups, and what does that tell you about where you're going with your work?
Yeah, for me, it's a huge honor to be recognized by those groups because these are really my colleagues. I mean, in the selection committee is usually the sort of leading people in the field and stuff. So I'm very much honored. And also, I feel like I've been very fortunate in my career in that I've had these really great opportunities. I went to Carnegie Mellon, which is a terrific school, and that really opened all kinds of doors and opportunities and really allowed me to sort of excel in the field. And so, I guess for me, one of the things I feel as a result of these kinds of words is the need to sort of give back to other people, right? To help other people get those opportunities and stuff. And so I've worked in my current position. I'm the director of the Information Sciences Institute. As the director, we've really launched sort of serious efforts in terms of diversifying our workforce, with a whole DEI initiative where we're really trying to make sure that other people have these kind of opportunities and can get the chance to excel. And I feel like, I excelled partly because a lot of other people along the way, helped me in various ways that opened various doors and made opportunities possible for me.
Is the passion for this type of work at an all-time high? And are you seeing young people coming in with just as much passion as you had?
You mean passion for promoting diversity
for the research itself and technology itself? Oh,
I see. I think very much so. I think there's AI these days is getting so much visibility that there's just a tremendous amount of people that are interested in sort of getting into this space and working on it. And it's not just within the computer science community. So now I get people from across different disciplines that reach out to me and say, hey, we really need to work with you guys and figure out how we can apply AI to solve the problems that we have. And, for example, we've gotten a lot of interest from the medical school here at USC. And a number of people that I talked to there are connecting to me and setting up meetings and sort of say, hey, we need to figure out how we can actually make use of some of these techniques to solve some of our research problems on the medical side and stuff. And so we just launched a new center on AI research for health, where the idea is to actually bring people together from the AI side. And we have, a very large number of people at ISI that actually work in this space. And from the medical side, so we have a number of people from the medical school and other parts of the university that the idea is to then bring them together and look for sort of collaborative projects where we can really make progress in terms of applying the AI research techniques to medical.
Yeah, and this is one of the ones where I think, oh yeah, this makes sense. Let's have AI, go through MRI scans or whatever. So are there any off the top of your head, some applications for stuff that you're thinking or they've proposed to you? They say, this is what we want to do in the field of medical machine learning.
One project we just hired a postdoc to work on is, we have a group here that works on image and video processing. And so we've been working with some folks in the Department of Radiation Oncology, where they have to do things like treat brain tumors, using radiation. And one of the problems apparently that happens is that they tell the patients, don't move your head, keep as still as possible. But then people move their head, right? And if you're using radiation to try to target a tumor, that's a problem, right? Because it's not necessarily targeting exactly where you want to target in the brain. And so one of the projects we're working on now, and just got a postdoc to help with this task, is to use image processing techniques and face recognition to pinpoint with very high accuracy the exact location of someone's head, so that then if they move their head during this treatment, that in real time you could actually adjust the beam in terms of where it's targeting and stuff, and so you could actually in real time make the adjustments so that it's always targeting exactly the right spot.
Now that's cool.
Yeah,
that is cool. I mean, this is utilizing like kind of some of the motion capture stuff we have now, where you can blurry behind me and stuff, but it knows where your face is. Some of the deep fake almost, it's all similar in this way. Where
in fact, the researcher that's working on this project, in fact, has done a lot of work on detecting deep fakes. So they're definitely related in terms of being able to do face recognition and understand exactly where someone's doing and moving.
That is so neat. So you, as somebody who is working in this field, are you a Python guy? Are you what do you read the language? Can you write code?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't really have time to program anymore. I can still read code. If I had to write it, I'd probably be in trouble. But most of our students now are using either Java or Python. And really most people move to Python. But we have some older projects that still use Java. So I still hire Java programmers from time to time to support the existing.
In your heyday, what was it? Was it C?
Lisp? Oh, Lisp. I was a big Lisp programmer. So in the early days of AI, I mean, if you did AI, you did Lisp programming.
Really? Wow.
So Lisp was a great language. I spent many years programming Lisp.
Yeah. Well, and then it becomes obsolete, and you're just like, oh, great.
Oh, I think there's still the people around that still do Lisp, but I think everyone is, at least in the spaces that we work in, have sort of moved to Python.
Yeah, I mean, Python is incredible and very simple in a lot of ways. I've dabbled, so. But you're also the executive director of the Information and Science Institute for the University of Southern California. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Wow. Yeah. So obviously you're in a position to influence the direction of research. What do you think are some of the big issues with the field? Something that you're worried about, and what do you think would be the ways to address some of the challenges that you might be facing?
Yeah, I think AI in general is at this inflection point where we've seen these tremendous gains in terms of some of the capabilities of the systems, right? If you look at things like deep learning, which has this amazing ability to sort of recognize things like, you can show these systems a photograph and it will describe in English what is actually in the photo, which, I think is quite remarkable because, some of these photos can be incredibly complicated. And then things like Chat GPT, which, people haven't seen them. This is a system that, you can interact with, and it has an incredible ability to generate text. And I mean, so you can ask it. I mean, I've actually played around with this. I had said, okay, write me a proposal to get funding to build a quantum computer. And it writes a nice little proposal with all the sections and explanations about, what it's going to, how it's going to solve the problem and references and stuff. And so I think that the technology out there is really quite remarkable in some of the capabilities and stuff. But at the same time, you have to worry about what some of the uses of this technology are. And we've even seen some of that with, an example of this is like the social media, right? We've seen a really negative effect of social media on things like democracy and sort of those kinds of things. So, one of the things I think we're trying hard to do here at ISI is really to work on these hard problems to address some of these sort of problems and really try to promote the sort of the positive uses of the technology and try to address some of the negative things, right? So, for example, we have one group here at ISI that's worked on detecting and sort of countering sort of this negative messaging in social media, right? So being able to recognize that when there's some conversation that's going off the rails to, maybe redirect it back and, recognize when, maybe someone is trying to be recruited for some nefarious purpose, doing things like detecting bots that, are impersonating people, that, like on Twitter, when, maybe you think that there's a person tweeting something, but really it's a bot trying to promote some agenda that is problematic. So I think, in my role as the director, we do have the opportunity to fund these kinds of projects. So we have sort of pilot projects that we start here, with internal funds to kind of get some of these projects going, where then the idea is once they get some initial results and stuff, they can go to either a government agency or a foundation and stuff to try to get larger follow-on funding and stuff to really try to address these concerns.
And obviously, you mentioned Chat GPT, and this is by a company called openai, which started as a nonprofit, but then turned around and became a for-profit company. Are there worries about the bias that's inherent when you have one company or one group of people feeding this AI as powerful as that, certain information?
Oh yeah, I think we should be worried. I mean, not necessarily specifically about OpenAI, but I think in general, we should worry when, a company has a motive agenda, then it may not always align with what's best for the world. I mean, I think we've seen that in the social media companies, right? If you look at, I don't want to pick on any one company, but in the social media companies in general, right? It's like, well, they want to make money. So lots of times they will promote things that, get people to stay longer on their site and show people more things. But those things that they're promoting might end up having a very negative effect. And I think that's just one example. And so I think I do think we have to worry about that, and I think it's important that we don't just sort of turn over the world to some of these really big companies and sort of say, oh, okay, yeah, OpenAI will solve this problem for us, and we can just assume that it will do good things for the world. I think it's important that other people develop sort of the technology as well that might be able to ensure that it's used in a positive way.
Yeah, we could talk about dystopian future, depending on how you define it. We could be in it as we speak, just because of the things I've seen on Facebook and etc. Quite frightening.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think that it's important that we figure out how to make sure that some of these companies don't become all powerful to the point where we don't really have control of them.
Have you heard about this debacle with Midjourney and some of these other image apps as well?
Yes, you mean in terms of basically using copyrighted data, right? I know that the Getty Images, for example, I understand was suing them, and I saw some of the examples of that where it would basically the image produced by some of these systems would then have a distorted, version of the watermark.
The watermark.
From the company and stuff. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, which is that these models, what they're doing is, right, they're importing all of this huge amount of data, and they're able to do these amazing things, both in terms of text and images. But it's coming from somewhere, right? I mean, some of it gets synthesized, and maybe you wouldn't recognize where it came from, but you could easily imagine that the same, just like with the images, just with text as well, you can easily imagine that it could produce text that, in fact, comes from some copyrighted source.
Yeah. And has this always been a touchy subject when it comes to data harvesting, data mining, machine learning, where you get the data from?
Well, I think it's always been a touchy subject, but I think it's become much more of a problem now with the computing power and space that's available to run these algorithms, right? That these systems just scrape up so much data, right? And they don't even tell us exactly what data they're using, but you can assume that they're pulling data from journal articles, books, just text on the web. I mean, all this information is sort of fair game in terms of what these systems are using. And I don't think we've seen in the past systems that would just do it at such massive scale with so much information and stuff. And then, so powerful in terms of the kinds of things that they're producing. And so I think it's becoming much more front and center that this is really an issue in terms of dealing with who really owns this information, and is it fair that they're just sort of distilling all this without compensating the people that could have created it.
Yeah, I suppose there's considerations for, creative work and proprietary information, but then there's just like health data from people and pet, data. I heard the other day from data for your pets and stuff, and it's all quite sensitive, but we are moving into this era where we are all participating in this one big brain, right? The internet is this big brain. Are we ever going to be able to have ownership on anything ever again, including data? I guess is a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is, it's an important thing to work on, and we should be protecting people's private information, right? I think there's more we could do to protect it, but, for example, health data especially, right? That information should not be out there. It should not be public. But what happens is sometimes it does get released accidentally, and you can imagine that some of it might get released accidentally, and some of these systems might inadvertently just scoop it up and make it available, right? And so that's actually quite concerning, and we should find ways to better ensure that we protect privacy.
Absolutely. And what about in the case of Cambridge Analytica? And I could create a script that combs Facebook, for data, right? And I can go through every page and collect things that are open to see. And yet at the same time, this is considered illegal or immoral. So why is it?
I don't think illegal. I think it would be considered violating the company usage agreement, right? So when you sign up to Facebook, right, there's some terms and conditions that you agree to. And so it's certainly not illegal, but it might be the case that you're violating their terms of service.
Certainly nefarious, depending on how you use it, I guess.
Yes, exactly. But I don't think anyone would necessarily get prosecuted for, scraping the data from Facebook, but they might go after you because, you've sort of violated their terms.
Yeah. When they say, when companies talk about data leaks, though, too, and I know Facebook has gotten in trouble for having issues with something where emails and stuff get. So what's the difference between that and what happened at Cambridge Analytica as far as?
Well, if I remember with Cambridge Analytica, it wasn't. I actually don't know. Did they scrape the data from Facebook, or did they have an agreement with Facebook?
No. They scraped the data. I'm pretty sure they did it in a way that was against the terms and service, and then turned around and used that information to target people who were on the fence politically and just needed to nudge either one way or the other, and ran ads and surveys in order to push them that direction.
Right. So tell me your question again. Sorry.
So I think what's the difference between their utilization of the data, how they got? I guess you don't know how they got it, and I don't know if I'm clear, but there's also data leaks that happen all the time with certain companies where sensitive documents. I guess that some data is more open than others. I guess is all I can.
Yeah, and I think in the case of Cambridge Analytica, right, they had a particularly nefarious use for the data, right? I mean, that's really what.
Well, within the realm of what's acceptable in the Western world, I mean, to a lot of them, it was completely legal, so it was completely ethical in that way. But for people like you and me, we probably think, well, that was totally a rotten thing to do. But this is why democracy is under threat right now, because of the ability to manipulate people to this degree with technology.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that we should be trying to figure out how to avoid these kinds of things. And in terms of some data being more open than others, we have a huge problem today with protecting information, right? I mean, it's not a coincidence that you see all these leaks of information, and it's not even that companies are being particularly careless. I think it's rather, some companies are being careless, but I think in many cases, the problem is that with computer security, it's just incredibly hard to keep a computer secure these days. And that's simply because these systems are so complicated, and the bad guys are willing to spend a lot of time and effort trying to find sort of holes in the technology, and there are holes out there that they find a way in, and then they can then exploit this information stuff. And so I think
And are there considerations about not even letting companies hold on to the data and store them in servers, warehouses somewhere? Shouldn't some of this data be self-destructive or something?
Yes, I definitely. I mean, certainly with my own information, for example, with banking information, that kind of stuff. I don't let companies hold that information, right? If they give you a choice, I'm like, no, don't save my information, because I know someone may break into your servers at some point and then steal my information. So it's better if you don't have it. So,
do you want Google to save your password? No, no, thank you. I'll write it down. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you one last question. I'll let you get on with your day. You've actually collaborated with a lot of institutions and a lot of individuals. Can you talk about one particularly successful collaboration you've had, or a colleague that you look fondly upon?
I think one very successful collaboration was with the museum community. So we launched a project first with the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where they were interested in publishing the information about their collection and making it sort of more widely available so that people could actually build applications on top of it and use their data for different kinds of things. And that collaboration went really well, and that led to a much larger collaboration where we then created this thing called the American Art Collaborative, where the idea was a set of American art museums, where the idea was to have all of those art museums basically share their collection information and details about their internal collections, and be able to publish that in sort of a unified form. And so that's an example of sort of creating a knowledge graph where we're pulling information from lots of different organizations. Each organization represents that information differently. They have it stored in different ways in different places and stuff. And so it was a fun project for us to sort of apply the kinds of technology we've been building to create knowledge graphs. And then just really fun to work with them. I mean, it's always fun to sit in a meeting with a bunch of people that are art historians and have other backgrounds and stuff, and lots of times we would have the meetings for this project in actual art museums and stuff. So it's always great because you go see their collections and stuff.
Yeah. Did you learn anything about art during that time?
Oh, I did. I learned quite a bit about art there.
You have any favorites?
Oh, I always loved the Impressionist stuff. And so there was a lot of American museums. There was always a great collection of all these Impressionist paintings and stuff. It's one of my favorite genres of paintings. But but I learned a lot about portraits, which was really interesting, right? So because one of them was the Smithsonian Portrait Gallery, so they had a whole collection of stuff. And what I thought was really interesting about the portraits was that most of the times the most interesting part about the portrait was sort of the history behind the person who was either being painted or even the painter in some cases. Right, and it made that type of art. I never really got very excited about portraits, but it made portraits so much more interesting once you sort of dig in and learn. And part of the project was being able to take that information, right? Once you have the information about the collections and stuff, then you can actually link it up to other resources, right? And so other cases we could find for the portraits, we could then link in many cases to the Wikipedia page that then describes the person who was actually painted in the portrait and stuff. And a lot of interesting people.
I think it makes a big difference, right? This was painted by a one-armed, degenerate, drunken, elephant. It's like, oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I like it when it has a story behind it, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll end it there. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me for a short period of time. Maybe we'll have you back and see if I can come up with some even better questions. That
was fun.
Yeah. Thanks, try not to seem too stupid because the stuff usually is right over my head. So appreciate you having mercy. Craig A. Knoblock, machine learning expert down there at the University of Southern California. Anything you want to add before we go?
No, this is great. I really enjoyed chatting with you today.
All right. Well, we'll talk after. We're going to say goodbye. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.